Hi, this is Joy at Pine Quilt Shop. Today we're going to talk about hand stitching thread, and I want to give you a little understanding of some of your options and how to understand how various thread weights compare to each other. So hand stitching thread uses a system that we call the weight system, and that system basically puts a number on the thread that indicates how many kilometers of it takes to equal 1 kilogram. So with this system, a thread with a high number is going to actually be a thinner thread because it takes more kilometers to equal a kilogram than a thread that is a thicker thread and then of course takes fewer kilometers to equal that 1 kilogram weight. So we're going to take a look at the threads that I have in front of me. I have a few of them laid out to show you so we can talk about them and compare. And the first 3 threads that you see here are all 12 weight threads. This is the 12 weight silky cotton, this is a 12 weight wool thread, and this is a 12 weight cotton as well, pearl cotton. And then we have 2 more pearl cottons. So this is an 8 weight, this is a 5 weight, and I have some embroidery floss. So let's talk a little bit about the differences. Those first 3 threads are all 12 weight. So with all of them, it takes 12 kilometers of that thread to equal a kilogram. When you look at them though, they don't all look the same from a thickness standpoint. And that's because of differences in the fiber content and the twist. This thread looks quite thin, but yet it's a 12 weight thread. That's because it's twisted very tightly. So it has a very tight twist, and so it's basically a denser thread. Then we have the wool thread, which looks a little thicker than the other 2. But that's because it's wool, it's a softer fiber, it can't be twisted as tightly, so it ends up being a little bit more of a fluffier looking thread. And then I have the 12 weight pearl cotton, and that is a cotton thread, has a nice twist on it, and you can see it's kind of in the middle of those 2 from a standpoint of how thick it looks. So let's talk about our pearl cottons. So we have a 12, an 8, and a 5. Pearl cotton also comes in a 3 weight, which we don't normally stock here at the shop. It's very heavy. So with our pearl cottons, they have a very nice twist. So if you look at the pearl cottons, they're twisted together tightly, they hold their shape. That really helps you create dimension and texture in your stitches. So pearl cotton tends to be a better thread than floss from a standpoint of doing any dimensional stitches. So if you're doing French knots or bullion knots, things that add texture and dimension, those pearl cottons are going to be good at that because they have enough of a twist to stay together and create that dimension in your stitches. Hard to get a lot of dimension in stitches if you're using floss. So pearl cotton is a better choice there. So I want to talk a little bit about pearl cotton versus floss, because sometimes you have a pattern that calls for one and you want to use the other and vice versa. So let's just talk weights a little bit compared to floss, because that's a question we get a lot. So the 12 weight pearl cotton is equal roughly to 1 to 2 strands of embroidery floss. The 8 weight is equal to 3 strands of embroidery floss, so roughly half of this if you split it. And the 5 weight is equal to 4 to 5 strands of embroidery floss. I would say it definitely probably is closer to the 5 side. And that 3 weight pearl cotton that I don't have to show you is definitely a full 6 strands of embroidery floss. So if you are trying to translate a pattern, that is the math to use to translate between your pearl cotton and your floss. If you need to use one versus the other, maybe you don't have a color and you want to change it up and use it. So the advantage of the floss is the fact that it is not twisted tightly together and it can be separated into strands. So you can take this 6 strand floss and you can split it out and use a single strand if you need to. You can split it in half and do 3 and 3. If you want, you can do 2. So you can basically make this into whatever thickness of thread that you would like. Obviously not thicker than what you started out with, but you can work your way down by splitting it out and doing different strands. So there's flexibility there in kind of being able to create your own weight. But what you give up is you give up it being twisted together and staying together and really holding its shape well. So that is kind of the pro and con of floss versus the pearl cotton. So I wanted to kind of run through that because I know a lot of people have questions about converting the weights. So when I'm stitching, I like, for stitching wool appliques down, I love to use this wool thread or my pearl cotton because it really blends in nicely and it makes a nice stitch along the edge of the project. When I'm doing dimensional stitches, I definitely go to my pearl cottons, and depending on what I'm doing, I'll use all three of these thicknesses. If you're doing things like bullion knots or French knots, you don't have to wrap as many times with a thicker thread like this because it builds up faster, and so you can get a nice size knot with fewer wraps around the needle. So that's when I go to these. I use my floss though if I need to do really fine detail. I will use my floss. Sometimes I will make my own color by blending 2 strands of one with 2 strands of a different color. So you have a lot of flexibility there. And then the 12 weight sulky, I love that for hand embroidery. It's a great hand embroidery thread. I love to use that for color work if I'm doing a tea towel, for example, and maybe I'm doing it with all red or all blue. I love to use my sulky for hand embroidery stitches. And really any of these will work for a hand embroidery stitch. They are all great choices for that. So there's a little overview on thread options. Hopefully we gave you a good understanding of that weight system. So when you're looking at thread, you can compare it. And then do just always keep in mind that they may not look the same even though they have the same weight, and it all comes down to how tightly they're twisted. And you've got a nice comparison now too for converting your floss to pearl cotton or pearl cotton to floss if you need to change that out in a pattern. So you can do the conversion from floss to pearl cotton sizing as you need to. So hopefully this will be a helpful tutorial for you. We appreciate you guys joining us and watching today. Thanks for being with us. We have a great range of hand stitching threads available on our website at www.redpinequiltshop.com.